The light in the office changes just after 5 in the afternoon. The ambient noise of the building begins to drop. The sound of footsteps heading toward the elevators becomes more frequent. The day is supposedly ending. Yet, for many professionals, this is the exact moment when a quiet and familiar tension begins to settle in the chest. There is still so much to do. The inbox is still full. The project document remains barely started. The instinct, the overwhelming default response to this tension, is simply to stay. The glow of the computer monitor remains bright against the darkening room. The assumption is that working longer is the only valid way to handle a crushing workload. It feels necessary, responsible, and unavoidable. Think about what happens when a workday has no definitive end. The boundary between professional obligation and personal time dissolves. Dinner is interrupted by a quick check of the phone. The evening unwinds with a laptop open on the couch. The subtle belief driving this behavior is that more hours equal more value. If there is more work to do, the only logical solution is to supply more time. But this assumes that all time is equal and that all tasks are equally valuable. This is a dangerous assumption. It leads to a life where attention is constantly fractured. The mind never truly rests, and ironically, the quality of the most important work begins to degrade. The modern professional landscape pushes us toward an endless workday, but there is a profound flaw in this design. Welcome to a space dedicated to rethinking how we approach our focus, our energy, and our time. Today, the conversation turns toward a specific and powerful paradox. The goal is to explore why artificially limiting the hours you work might be the most effective way to produce significantly better results. We will examine a concept called fixed schedule productivity. The promise here is that by committing to a firm, non-negotiable stopping point, perhaps 5:30 in the evening, a profound shift occurs in how the brain processes priorities. You might expect that cutting your hours would simply lead to missed deadlines and professional failure. By the end of our time together today, you may see that the exact opposite is true. You will understand how a scarcity of time inherently forces a rejection of shallow obligations. You will see the hidden cost of an open schedule. And most importantly, you will have a framework for drawing a hard line in your own day, forcing the kind of ruthless prioritization that actually drives real accomplishment. Let us slow down for a second and look at the foundation of this idea. We need to clarify where this tension between hours worked and value produced actually comes from. Most people tend to believe that output is a simple equation. Time spent at the desk equals work completed. If you want to achieve more, you must sit there longer. This belief is so deeply ingrained that it shapes the culture of almost every modern organization. The culture of constant connectivity expects professionals to read and respond to messages quickly, often leading them to monitor communications for 20 to 25 hours a week outside of regular office hours. This behavior is widely accepted as necessary. But this belief is incomplete. It ignores the difference between shallow tasks and deep concentration. Shallow work consists of logistical tasks that are not cognitively demanding and are often performed while distracted. Sending messages, attending vague meetings, and moving information around are all shallow efforts. They do not create much new value in the world, and they are easy to replicate. When the workday has no fixed end, these shallow tasks expand to fill the available time. Because you know you have the entire evening to finish the big, demanding project, you allow yourself to spend the prime hours of the afternoon responding to trivial requests. You tell yourself that you are clearing the decks, but the decks are never clear. Now here is where it gets interesting. When you establish a fixed schedule, you introduce scarcity. Imagine deciding that you absolutely will not work past 5:30. Suddenly your time is strictly bounded. You look at the 8 hours ahead of you, and you look at a list of tasks that would normally take 12 hours. You are forced to make immediate, difficult choices. You can no longer afford to spend an hour crafting the perfect reply to a minor question. You are forced to prioritize the efforts that actually move the needle. A firm quitting time acts as a forcing function. It strips away the illusion that everything is important. By working backward from a rigid stopping point, you must determine what rules and habits are necessary to satisfy that constraint. You begin to set drastic quotas on major sources of shallow endeavors. You might drastically limit travel, as trips generate surprisingly large loads of urgent, shallow obligations. You cap the shallow to protect the deep efforts that ultimately determine your professional fate. Let us make this concrete. Consider a high-pressure management consulting firm with a deeply ingrained culture of connectivity. The assumption at this firm is that constant connection to clients and colleagues is essential. A researcher convinced the executives to test this assumption by forcing a team to take one full day off each week with absolutely no connectivity allowed. The team initially resisted. The partner in charge was nervous about telling the client, and the consultants were worried they were jeopardizing their careers. But the outcome was startling. The team did not lose the client, and no one lost their job. Instead, the consultants experienced more enjoyment in their work, better communication among themselves, more learning, and they delivered a better product to the client. The artificial limit on their availability did not destroy their value. It enhanced it. This demonstrates that continuous connectivity does not necessarily help the bottom line, and the lack of it does not equate to a lack of productivity. This sounds simple, but it changes more than it first appears to. To fully understand why we naturally drift toward endless, boundaryless workdays, we have to go deeper into the psychology of modern work. There is a tension here between what actually creates value and what merely looks valuable. As knowledge work makes more complex demands, it becomes increasingly difficult to measure the value of an individual effort. In an industrial age, productivity was unambiguous. It was measured by widgets created per unit of time. But today, how do you measure the daily output of a strategist, a writer, or an analyst? Because these metrics fall into an opaque region resistant to easy measurement, a void is created. This void is called the metric black hole. In the absence of clear indicators of what it means to be productive, many professionals turn back toward an industrial indicator of productivity. They default to doing lots of stuff in a highly visible manner. This behavior is known as using busyness as a proxy for productivity. If you send messages at all hours, if you schedule and attend meetings constantly, and if you bounce ideas off everyone you encounter, you seem busy in a public manner. You convince yourself and others that you are doing your job well because you are in constant motion. But extracting value from information is often at odds with busyness. True cognitive work requires long periods of unbroken concentration. It requires pushing the mind toward the limit of its abilities. This type of effort is exhausting. Performance psychologists note that someone familiar with the rigors of deep concentration can sustain this state for perhaps 4 hours a day, rarely more. This means that out of a typical 8-hour workday, you only have a finite capacity for truly profound work. When you do not have a fixed schedule, you tend to waste this limited capacity on the illusion of busyness. You follow the principle of least resistance. Without clear feedback on the bottom line impact of various behaviors, the natural tendency is to choose behaviors that are easiest in the moment. It is significantly easier to simply chime in on the latest communication thread than to deploy a thoughtful approach to figuring out what you should be working on. It is easier to set up a standing weekly meeting to create a visible simulacrum of progress than to manage time and obligations intelligently. It is easier to forward a message with a short, open-ended question like "thoughts" than to craft a careful response. The sender saves seconds of energy, but commands many minutes or hours of attention from the recipients. On the surface, this looks obvious, but it is not. The modern professional landscape actually praises this lack of boundaries. We exist in an environment heavily influenced by what communication theorists call a technopoly. In a technopoly, alternatives to the prevailing technology become invisible and irrelevant. This has evolved into an internet-centric ideology. We assume that rapid communication, serendipitous collaboration, and an active presence on social platforms are inherently good. Big trends in business today actively decrease the ability to perform concentrated work. Open offices create massive distraction. Instant messaging systems are meant to be always active, magnifying the impact of interruption. A single short interruption significantly delays the total time required to complete a task. By establishing a fixed schedule, you build a fortress against this technopoly. You declare that your time is finite. This forces you to respect the cognitive limit of 4 hours of intense concentration. Shallow work does not become dangerous until it crowds out your bounded capacity for deep efforts. But a workday without limits is easily fragmented by meetings and appointments, leaving surprisingly little time left for solo, uninterrupted thought. A fixed quitting time demands that you treat shallow work with suspicion, keeping it confined so it does not impede your deeper efforts. Bring this topic fully into ordinary life. Think about how this dynamic plays out in daily experience. Consider 5 specific recognizable scenarios. First, look at the manager sitting at the dinner table. The meal is finished, but the phone is resting right next to the plate. The manager feels a lingering sense of unease about the team's progress. A message comes in. It is a minor logistical question. The manager answers it immediately. This feels like excellent leadership. The manager believes they are enabling the team's productivity by preventing a project logjam. But the team did not actually require an immediate, attention-fracturing response. By continually being available, the manager trains the team to rely on instant answers rather than solving problems independently. The manager sacrifices their own recovery time to perform a shallow version of leadership. If the manager had a strict 5:30 stopping point, the team would adapt. They would save non-urgent questions for the morning, and the manager would return to work the next day with a restored mind. Second, consider the creative professional trying to build a new business strategy. Their calendar is an unbroken wall of colored blocks. They have scheduled back-to-back meetings all week. They believe these meetings are crucial for collaboration. But these regularly occurring meetings tend to pile up and fracture schedules to the point where sustained focus becomes impossible. The creative professional reaches the end of the week exhausted, having spoken to dozens of people, but having written absolutely nothing of substance. The meetings were easier than the solitary, difficult work of thinking. A fixed schedule would force this professional to look at their limited hours and realize that attending 5 hours of meetings leaves 0 hours for actual creation. The artificial constraint would force them to decline the invitations and protect their most valuable asset. Third, observe the writer who has dedicated the morning to finishing a difficult chapter. The document is open. The cursor blinks. The work requires holding multiple complex ideas in the mind simultaneously. It is uncomfortable. The brain looks for an escape. The writer opens an internet browser to do some quick research. 10 minutes later, they are responding to emails. They convince themselves that clearing the inbox is a necessary warm-up. This is a classic example of the principle of least resistance. Escaping the short-term discomfort of concentration is always easier in the moment. If the writer knew they had to stop all work at 5:30, the panic of the impending deadline would override the discomfort of the hard task. The scarcity of time would make the distraction look like a threat rather than a relief. Fourth, think about the junior employee eager to prove their worth. They lack a clear metric to demonstrate their value, so they turn to the metric black hole. They set up their communication software to flash an alert whenever a new comment is posted. They jump over to the software, type their thoughts, and jump back to their work with barely a pause. They believe their speed makes them an essential team member. But this constant context switching degrades their cognitive capacity. They are acting like a human network router, moving information around without adding deep value. A fixed schedule would expose the inefficiency of this behavior. If they only had 8 hours to deliver a tangible result, they could not afford to spend 2 of those hours reacting to every digital twitch. Fifth, visualize the parent working from home. The boundaries between professional duty and family life are completely erased. They answer work calls while making breakfast. They try to review documents while the children play in the same room. They intend to finish the main project after the children go to sleep. The entire day is a blurred, continuous stretch of partial attention. They are never fully present as a professional and never fully present as a parent. The lack of a fixed schedule creates a perpetual state of low-grade anxiety. Implementing a firm quitting time would be incredibly difficult at first. It would require difficult conversations and setting strict boundaries, but it would eventually return a sense of structure. The hours dedicated to work would demand intense focus, and the hours dedicated to family would finally be free of the glowing screen. These scenarios reveal that the endless workday is not a sign of dedication. It is a symptom of avoidance. We avoid the hard work of planning. We avoid the discomfort of saying no. We avoid the terrifying reality that we are ultimately responsible for producing something of real value. Zoom out from individual behavior for a moment. Look at what this topic suggests about modern culture and the nature of work. We have built an economic system that increasingly rewards deep, specialized knowledge. The ability to learn hard things fast and produce at an elite level is more valuable than ever. Yet simultaneously, we have constructed a daily environment that actively destroys the capacity for this kind of depth. We prioritize serendipitous collaboration, rapid communication, and active social media presence over sustained concentration. This is a profound paradox. Why do organizations promote behaviors that decrease the ability to perform deep work? The reasons are based on flawed thinking combined with the ambiguity and confusion that define knowledge work. We spend immense resources paying highly trained professionals to process trivial messages. One analysis revealed that a company was spending well over $1 million a year just to pay people to process emails. A free and frictionless method of communication created soft costs equivalent to procuring a small corporate jet. And yet, this behavior continues because the negative impact on the bottom line is hidden within the metric black hole. We are witnessing a historical shift in how human attention is valued and consumed. The expectation of constant availability turns individuals into nodes in a network. The network demands rapid response times to function smoothly. But human beings are not designed to be network routers. We are designed to think deeply, to build, to synthesize, and to create. When we allow our schedules to remain open and unbounded, we surrender our autonomy to the network. We let the incoming stream of demands dictate our focus. Fixed schedule productivity is not merely a time management tactic. It is a philosophical stance. It is a declaration of independence from the culture of shallow connectivity. It is a refusal to equate visible busyness with true importance. By fixing a firm goal of not working past a certain time, you take back control of your cognitive landscape. You recognize that your attention is a finite and precious resource. You acknowledge that spending half the day wallowing in the shallows might feel harmless, but it crowds out the deeper efforts that determine your actual impact. It forces a radical honesty about what truly matters. If you decide in advance what you are going to do with every minute of your workday, you give every minute a job. You batch similar small tasks into dedicated blocks, rather than letting them fracture your entire day. You treat your time with the respect it deserves. It is natural to resist this level of structure. It is undoubtedly easier to allow internal whims and external requests to drive your schedule, but structure does not stifle creativity. Without structure, time easily devolves into email, social media, and web surfing. This shallow behavior is not conducive to creativity. A structured, limited schedule ensures that you regularly put aside time to grapple with new ideas and work deeply on challenging problems. Bring the emotional and intellectual thread of this exploration together. The tension we started with, the feeling of the workday bleeding endlessly into the night, is not a permanent condition. It is a choice.